Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I am naturopathic Dr. Fiona Chin, co-founder of the Kidney Disease Solution, kidney coach Dialysis, and I am joined again today by the wonderful, fabulous Jessianna Saville. If you haven't seen Jessianna before, she is the director of Kidney Nutritional Institute and the head renal dietitian there. Jessianna has been in the field for a long time. She often speaks at educational events, training nephrologists and other renal dietitians about all things diet and renal function. She's quite the expert in the field, and she's been on our channel a lot for a very good reason. So Jess, thank you. Welcome back to the channel and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah, happy to be here. It's always fun. I secretly come here because I like to pick your brain.
Oh, the ditto goes two ways there. So today we thought we would talk about all things salt and its relationship to chronic kidney disease. Do you need to cut it out? Is it something you have to look into? Is it important? How do you know? What are the symptoms? All of those great things. So Jess, I'm just going to ask you a whole pile of questions and I'll leave your amazing knowledge to lead the way. So the first thing is salt. What is it? And do we actually have to worry about it when it comes to chronic kidney disease? Is it a consideration when we're thinking about our diet?
Okay, so I would say number one is salt. I think we all know, salt is what makes our food have extra flavor.
Yeah, it's
That's
tasty.
sodium, it's an electrolyte, it's really, really an important nutrient in our body. It gets demonized, so it's like, don't eat any salt if you have kidney disease, but it is such an essential nutrient. We all need to have some sodium in our diet, and the form by which we get that is one thing we'll talk about tonight. It's a big deal with kidney disease on multiple levels for the before you like causation factors of kidney disease. Salt, and we'll dig into this a little bit more, but salt is often seen as a contributing part of developing hypertension, certainly a driver of hypertension for some people. Then if you have kidney disease, there's a lot of things that come into play with salt, and how it drives your kidneys glomerular pressure on top of blood pressure, on top of, a bunch of other things as well. There's even some studies and that showed salt was connected with gut health. So there's that whole factor. And then if you have late stage or even end stage kidney disease, and now you have to watch fluid, salt really becomes an issue because it drives thirst. And so for people that need a fluid restriction, it can be a really big problem. So really, like, the whole spectrum of kidney disease, from before you get it and contributing factors all the way to if you've had kidney failure and you're on dialysis or even gearing up for transplant, salt plays a big role, plays a really, really big role.
So I think the other important thing to say in that is people may not realize, but salt is added to everything, isn't it? Like all your commercial foods and stuff, the way they make it taste good, sugar and salt.
Yeah, sugar and salt. I mean, it's such a huge part of a food supply. And I mean, even historically, salt has always been a really, really important part of food preservation. It's been a really important part of flavoring. I mean, salt is as old can be. From the beginning of time, you talk about salt. But in our modern day food supply and industrialized, you know, countries, salt is really used a lot in processing, and we develop a taste for it. Our taste buds adjust to it. It's used in restaurant foods. I mean, any good chef salts at every step of cooking, you know. So it's really prevalent in most of our food supply and most of our diets.
Yeah. So I think that's the first thing to mention too, is people may go, well, I don't add salt or I don't eat a lot of it. But if you're eating processed packaged foods, if you turn over a can of soup or anything like that and you look, you're going to see salt added. And then in the nutrient panel, you can see how much sodium is in there. So, okay, so before we get into how much sodium people should eat and things like that, let's go into each of these areas. So let's go sodium and hypertension, because we know that after diabetes, hypertension is the second biggest driver of chronic kidney disease in the Western world, and in the world. So why and how does high salt or sodium potentially drive blood pressure to go up? And why is that a problem in kidney disease?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a couple things to piece out here. I mean, for sure, there's some good data that shows the more salt you eat, the more likely you are to develop high blood pressure.
Mm.
However, something to consider is that usually a high salt diet is also a high processed food diet. And there's a lot of things other than salt in foods that have a lot of salt.
Mm.
I mean, even if, and you and I were talking about this before, even if you look at common table salt that a lot of people use, there's a lot of anti-caking agents, a lot of things other than just sodium chloride in it, as opposed to something like Himalayan salt or whatever, right?
Mm.
So it's sometimes to me a little bit tricky to totally put all the blame on salt as the driver of hypertension when you know someone that's eating a really high salt diet, maybe they're eating out a lot, they're getting tons of preservatives in their diet beyond salt. So I don't, I'm not 100% sure that salt's the only thing that drives it, but for sure, if you look at how much we eat versus how much we need, it's way too much. Like way, way too much. And there's lots and lots of population studies on how much we eat. And 70%, and this was in the States, but I'm sure it's pretty consistent around the world. 70% of the sodium intake in the States is from restaurants and processed food.
Oh, wow.
A lot. Like in a regular person's diet, 70% of their sodium intake is restaurant and processed food. And
Okay.
that like even like cooking at home is only like 5% of the sodium intake that people eat.
Wow.
Really, really,
Okay.
really insane.
That,
Um,
that that's massive.
yeah, yeah, it's a big thing. A lot of times we'll say, one of the first steps people can take if they're like, I want to improve my health, I don't know where to start, is start by looking at the if you're going to eat out, the quality of the food that you're eating out, and really like go in and look at the nutrient facts, uh, or shift to finding simple whole foods to eat at home. I mean, you may not have a dinner that comes out hot and there's green beans and rice and whatever on a restaurant plate, but a simple meal at home can be so much less salt and it saves you money. So
Well, there's that too. And by the sounds of it, 70% just doing that, 70% of your salt intake is going to go down just that
just
alone.
if you move to simple foods at home, simple foods at
Okay.
home. You
All right.
scrambling an egg, putting it with a lot of vegetables, right? Those are simple foods you can do at home.
Okay. So that's a good, simple way to get your salt intake down pretty much overnight and save some money. So, talk about the mechanism behind why potentially salt can drive blood pressure and then what happens inside the kidneys as well, because there's another mechanism that goes on inside of there. And as we progress through kidney disease, because I think that's important for people to
Yeah.
understand. Well.
Okay, there's a whole bunch here. One thing you have to understand is that um when we look at sodium intake, and I will say universally across holistic, conventional care, like every type of medical care, salt is a reduction of sodium intake is a accepted recommendation, right? Across the board. Like we all seem to be able to agree we should reduce sodium intake. One thing, however, that is missed before we get to your question is that sodium is not an isolated nutrient on driving improvement in blood pressure or in any of these pieces. So let me give an example of that. So we have other electrolytes, right? We have magnesium, we have potassium, we have sodium, and I'm forgetting the other one. What's the other one? What am I missing?
Bicarb,
The bicarb.
chloride.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
bicarb.
got these other, sorry. So we have these other nutrients that are playing into our blood pressure, our alkalinity beyond just sodium. When they looked at the DASH diet, there's a couple studies, they saw that reduction of blood pressure, they saw some reduction of blood pressure with reduction of sodium intake, but they saw more reduction of blood pressure with reduction of sodium intake and increase of potassium intake, that there was this really important relationship. It's not just what you take out, it's what you add in that's really, really important. And I point that out because, again, there's so many times that we demonize salt, or that patients, really diligent patients, I'm going to cut my salt intake back. And so they cut down their sodium intake and they don't get any benefit, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they see their blood pressure shift a little bit, but they're not seeing their kidney function change. Maybe, and now their food tastes gross too, and they don't want to eat because they're not using any salt.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful to be really narrow-minded that salt is the only driving factor of blood pressure. Though it's really important.
Yeah. No, it's a good point.
In the,
Thank you.
yeah, in kidneys, one of the things that happens is that as you increase your salt intake, and you have to remember our body loves homeostasis, it loves the balance. And so when it starts seeing the shift of sodium intake, it's going to pull a whole bunch of mechanisms, some of them which are tied back to the kidneys. It's going to pull a whole bunch of mechanisms to control that, and uh, and make sure that we don't have too much salt in our blood. I used to tell my patients, kind of like Kool-Aid, right? If you ever made Kool-Aid from a package growing up, and this is sugar, but kind of similar principles.
Yeah.
If you put your packet in and then you put water in, and then if you add way too much sugar into your Kool-Aid, what do? You're gonna have to add some more water in, like, or if you didn't add enough sugar, you have a little sugar in, but you're going to balance it till you get to the right flavor. Your body's the same way. It needs to balance it. So one of the things your kidneys does when you have a lot of sodium in your in your bloodstream, in your system, is that it's going to cause something called hyperfiltration. And what this does is it increases your kidneys filtration fraction, and you have increased glomerular pressure. So it's like, maybe analogy would be like if your kidney is a balloon, it gets tighter. It's tighter.
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the balloon's tighter because it's trying to push and rebalance a lot of this uh, kidney kidney pressure. So, or
Yes.
not, I'm sorry, not kidney pressure, but this overall this volume change and this need to realign the fluids and the sodium and everything else.
Yeah.
So it
And
really
if you,
drives this like pressure on the kidney
yeah.
when you have a lot of sodium.
And if you think about salt water and how buoyant it is, because the molecular structure of the water is more rigid
Mhm.
versus salt, like normal water. So if you've got that more rigidity water with higher internal structural pressure inside it pushing against these kidneys, and you've got kidney disease, meaning there's inflammation, oxidative stress, and probably a fibrotic process that started. So your lovely, beautiful, soft kidney filtration units have become hard and inflamed. And it's the same with protein, right? There's more push on the edge of it. You're going to cause more intracellular damage inside the kidneys by having this higher osmotic pressured water going through it from the
Yeah,
sodium.
yeah,
So yeah, so that is potentially how in later stages that high sodium salt diets can accelerate potentially kidney damage in the later stages. And then, of course, you get more thirsty with salt. So then you're going to be drinking more water. So then your poor old kidneys have to cope with that. And especially if you're on fluid restrictions and things like that, that doesn't help any of that sort of stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, and then that makes sense why it would increase blood pressure too, because we're going to have greater pressure inside the blood vessels with all of those sort of things. And same driver, we know with high blood pressure, that's going to cause further damage to the kidneys. So I'm interested to go back to your point where you said in the DASH diet, which for people who don't know, that's related to the Mediterranean heart disease diet, that when they just took out salt, it didn't make much of a difference until they added more potassium. And of course, I just want to quickly cover, we've done lots of videos on this, but potassium gets absolutely demonized when it comes to kidney disease as well. But we know that in just your example there, that taking potassium out can potentially elevate or make no changes to blood pressure or even elevate it. So do you want to quickly just talk to that point as well with the relationship between potassium and salt and sodium?
Yeah, so I mean the big takeaway from this is that if you're way later stage and you're showing that your potassium's high in your blood work, you may need to temporarily use a potassium restricted diet to get that aligned. But a lot of times potassium's demonized. People take all this potassium out of the diet. They're not eating tomatoes. They've taken out, you know, oranges or sweet potatoes, like all these really rich potassium foods. And they think it's going to help their kidneys, but it has the opposite effect because now they don't have as much control on their blood pressure because it's such an important part of that overall blood pressure control. So for us, one of the benefits if we're going to cut sodium down a little bit, and just to clarify, they saw some impact with sodium being reduced, but they saw the greatest impact with sodium reduced and potassium increased, right?
Yep.
And a lot of this comes down to the alkalinity of our system. And so if you're going to move towards cutting back a little bit of sodium, that's why when you increase the plants in your diet, you're going to see such like a bajillion other benefits. See a big result because plants often are rich in potassium and you can get a lot more potassium in your
Yeah.
diet.
Yeah.
And you may be able to explain the mechanism even deeper than me on that.
Well, no, like, well, yeah, it's that, like you say, it's the alkalinity with more plants. We know when we are more alkaline, actually, we switch more bicarbs. It goes down to the bicarb electron transport system, but that in itself causes vasodilation. And the more alkaline we are, one of the things that kidneys do in homeostasis, which you mentioned, is one of the major mechanisms of the kidneys is to keep our blood alkaline. Because if we have even a slight shift, we end up with metabolic acidosis, which can cause death. So the kidneys spend a lot of their energy trying to keep their body alkaline. Now, if you're a highly acidic diet, not eating enough plant based sort of foods, then the kidneys are going to spend all their time keeping this alkalinity balance going and trying to move us more towards an alkaline balance. Now, if you can do that through the diet, you free up the energy in the kidneys to heal and to do other things that are potentially going out. But if they have to spend all their energy trying to alkalize, they're not doing all of these other things that we need them to do. And I actually believe it's one of the reasons we see a shift in potassium. Is because it is the alkalinity mechanism has actually gone out and it's sort of blown itself, if you, for want of a better word, it's quite a crude word, but, and then we see this rise in potassium, but it's because the alkaline balance wasn't gotten right in the first place. And I think if you can get that right by using potassium plant-based foods early on, you can preserve a end stage increase in potassium by doing it early. That's what I see.
That's a great theory. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it logically makes sense to me too. But and again, I do see that in clinic. You know, the end stage people that are really getting high potassium levels generally have never got their alkalinity under control early, and it's one of the reasons why alkaline diets, and you would know this too from clinical practice, implemented early, those guys have better long-term outcomes, and generally we don't see potassium go up in end stages. At least that's been, and we don't get this imbalance in the electrolytes so much because that does tend to fix the sodium problem, right? When you're putting more plant-based diet and all of that sort of stuff, it sort of overall fixes it. When you're in an alkaline diet, sodium doesn't become a problem really anymore. So
yeah,
it's fascinating. So now, so for people out there listening to this, they go, okay, Jessianna, tell me, can I use Himalayan salt and pink salt and sea salt? Like, is there a difference between my salts, and is that okay? And the other question I know people have is, how much salt is the right amount? How much is too much? All those sort of things. I think they're good practical questions that I think people might ask.
yeah. These are good questions. So this is really controversial in the conventional world for sure. With dietitians, I I do have a preference for using the salts that don't have additives to them. Um, so I
Okay.
do have a preference for those salts, and some of those salts that are and I mean, there's a lot of marketing around salt too, just to be
Mhm.
fair, probably as much as supplements. But
Yes.
a really good salt actually will have I this is probably not exactly the term, but it'll have this micro mineral profile that's really interesting to me, and I really don't know if we know all the benefits of that, but there are these micro minerals, these minerals that maybe we don't like focus on so much that I do still think makes a difference. So I think it's a great idea to use, like a Himalayan salt, or I know a really popular one is the real salt that's mined out of Utah if you're in the
Yep.
States. But some of those salts that have um, I think they have a better mineral profile, and they don't have what is it,
The
the anti
caking agents, yeah.
Prussian yellow Prussian anti-caking agent. I should go pull. I think I have a bottle of regular salt in my cupboard, and
Yeah,
so
calcium silicate is the
calcium
common, and
silicate. Yeah.
yeah, it's a common one. And you wonder too with calcium and silica and just how that lays down in the kidneys and potentially what that can do. I
Oh,
don't
it's
know.
yellow prussiate. Yeah, sodium ferrocyanide. That doesn't sound very.
That's the other one. Yeah, yeah.
When they crystallize it, cyanide sounds bad no matter what. I'm sure that's a different form, but
Still, yeah.
so those are some things to think about. And the downside of that, to also be fair, is that if you've switched all your sodium out of an iodized salt in the processed or the regular salts, table salts, they often have iodine added to them, and you don't get the same amount of iodine from regular, like Himalayan salt, sea salt, whatever. I have some patients, they've cut down their salt and they've switched to like a Himalayan salt, and they haven't added iodine in any way. Yeah, a lot of times we'll use sea kelp or something like that, like some sort of a sea item to add iodine in. You don't need very much, but if you don't have any, iodine's a real essential nutrient for thyroid. And so
Yeah.
I think that's one thing, is that if people are going to switch to Himalayan salt or pink salt, or I guess they're the same thing, Himalayan pink salt, or any of the different salts that are not iodized, is to consider where you could add a little bit of iodine in. Um, even the seaweed snacks, or something to add
Yeah.
a little bit of iodine. That's my opinion. I don't know if that's what you guys are
No, I
using.
agree. And I'm so glad you said that because I forgot that iodized salt. But that's a really great um, piece of knowledge for people to know. And actually, the salt that I use is sea salt with kelp in it. So I like naturally iodized without it being added. It's just got
Yeah.
bits of kelp floating through it. So I get it that way. And people may or may not know that there seems to be a link between the thyroid and kidney disease too. We often see the thyroid start to go out. The parathyroid, definitely, there's a big link there, but the thyroid, we sometimes see autoimmune diseases or changes in thyroid function, probably due to this whole electrolyte mineral alkalinity balance thing that goes on and changes in the thyroid, because the thyroid's a big organ or gland that works with homeostasis in the body alongside the kidney. So that's,
Everything.
yeah, it regulates the lot. So yes, adding iodine via seaweed kelp and just cooking with it is, yeah, paramount. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So then, milligram wise, is there a amount of salt that you say to patients, I want you to keep your salt below this, or I want you to work on this amount of salt?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, it's around 2,000 to 2,300 milligrams, about. There's two caveats to that, but generally that's kind of where we'll aim for, and see where that takes people. Um, I have a couple instances where the sodium has to go lower than that. It's very not common, honestly, but I have a couple patients that their blood pressure is better controlled at around 1,500 milligrams. The only thing though is that when I see people really low, like a really low sodium intake where they have to stay really low, I do start wondering a little bit on what other factors are pushing on. So I have some people that maybe they need to get their aldosterone levels checked, because that can make a big difference in what's going on with sodium and potassium. But it's not honestly too common that I have to keep dropping the sodium. Sometimes it's their kidney function is really low. We can't increase potassium. We can't get that homeostasis. So we do have to just keep it low, because There's just not a trade-off. And if you have to regulate potassium, it can be real dangerous if it gets super high.
Yeah.
That's kind of for later stages. On the other side of things, though, right? So 2,000, 2,300, probably for like more than 90% of people, that's a good area to aim for. Then you got these 10%. On the other side, there's some people that they don't have, and I know you just looked these up, but genetically, they don't need to cut sodium back.
Mm.
It's not a critical piece for them. Um, so there's also a group that actually maybe needs to have a little bit more salt as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So for people wondering, there used to be the major gene, which I think was what did I write down? The SGK1 gene was the one I think was the
Yeah.
primary gene thought to be associated. If you had any mutations on that salt would be an issue. But from when I've looked, there is actually about 4 or 5 genes now, especially ones that work on the aldosterone cortico pathways that they now also think contribute to salt. I definitely have had patients where all you do is fix salt and the blood pressure goes down, and when we've done genetic testing, they've got like a homozygous, a double fault on that gene, and it makes a big difference. And probably in your patients where you're taking those levels right down, maybe they've got a homozygous gene fault on 4 or 5 of the salt sodium regulating genes. And then you have someone like me who, because I eat all natural foods and everything from home and don't salt my food, my sodium, I just had my blood test done, it's too low. So I'm like, oops,
Yeah.
you're going to have to go back to salting my food. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but actually, that's something that people might ask as well. Is there issues with too low a sodium?
There is, and I honestly, I have so much admiration for patients because they work so hard and they just like take hold. They're going to solve this problem. But I have seen quite a few instances where their salt is too low. And there's two issues that I see pop up where I see that almost right away is sometimes their potassium goes up. There's several case reports where the people were on like 500 milligrams a day, like they'd cut it out totally.
Yeah.
And they're on this really low sodium intake, and they incrementally increase the sodium intake, and the potassium inversely comes down. So you can be too low. The phrase we use in our practice, I say this all this time, is no is not better than low. Like no sodium is not better than low sodium. You still need some. So that's one issue that I see. The other issue I see, and I see this with, I see it in CKD, but I see it way more in polycystic kidney disease where they drink a large volume of fluid as one of the treatment mechanisms.
Yeah.
Is that you get too low on your salt and now you have this whole electrolyte imbalance and you get leg cramps, especially leg cramps is what I hear. A lot of leg cramps, and people just feel really like they don't feel good. And in that case, like just on they have so much volume of fluid, they need to add salt just so that they have enough for their overall volume as well. So I've seen it where too low causes high potassium. I've seen it where too low causes things like muscle cramps. Um, and so there is a happy medium, and sometimes you really need to add in a little bit of salt. And if you have symptoms like that, or like for you, you look on your lab, if your sodium is really super low and you're drinking a large volume, right? That sodium level in your blood is not necessarily the best indicator of whether you're eating too much salt or not. That's really important. I get tons and tons of comments on that. But it is a great indicator if you are eating enough salt in ratio to the amount of fluid you're drinking. And that's where I'll use that number.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And just for people who are really practical, so 2000 to 2300 sort of, what does that equate into as far as teaspoons or pinches of salt? Do you know?
It's like,
So
I think a teaspoon is actually, I'm gonna just look it up. So
yeah.
how, I don't know. It's like one.
Yeah.
Okay, so one teaspoon of salt has 2,325 milligrams of sodium chloride.
Right. So
So I
that's
mean,
a teaspoon a
yeah,
day, basically.
yeah, basically about a teaspoon. Yeah.
Okay. That's good. That's easy for people to remember. Okay, Jess, anything else, salt, kidney disease, that we need to mention or cover?
I think the last thing that I will mention on kidney disease, because we didn't get down to this, if you're on dialysis or maybe your GFR less than 10, and you're in a situation where balancing your fluids is difficult, right?
Mm.
That it's easy for you to retain fluid. And that's a huge contributing factor into the decision to start dialysis for someone who's at a later stage, is if you're retaining fluid.
Yeah,
Um, and then once you're on dialysis, I I feel like one of the huge factors that predicts honestly how good you feel is how much fluid you hold on in between your dialysis sessions, because the more fluid you have to take off on sessions, honestly, the more difficult it is.
yeah, I
The
agree.
reason that this is really important when it comes to salt is salt does drive thirst. It is a mechanism, if you, and we all know that, right? That's why soda is used at fast food, because you can make, just on a business model, fast food makes a ton of money off of selling soda because people eat a lot of salt at
Yeah.
fast food and then they're thirsty, and then you sell them soda, right?
Yep.
Because then they're not thirsty anymore. But we all know that if you've had something really salty, what do? You take a drink of water. It's like automatic for all of us, or take a
Yeah.
drink of something. So if you have to manage your fluids, actually one of the best ways to manage fluid is not to count your fluids and count every little fluid you drink. It is to manage your salt and
Mm.
manage how much sodium you're drinking, so you don't have that mechanism and have to squash it. Because one of the hardest things to do is to say, "Oh, I'm not thirsty, so I'm not going to drink." That's like torture for
Yeah.
most people. Um, so I just, for that end stage, just know that salt can be a big driver. I mean, sugar and salt, those two things drive thirst. And so being mindful of how much you're taking can make a huge difference in fluid gains.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point for end stage, and especially dialysis, because people probably know, but that's what dialysis is doing. It's filtering and doing all the stuff that your kidneys can't do. So, yeah, I do see the same thing of people in between dialysis treatments. So that's a really good point. All right, Jess, anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I mean, if we're to recap a couple quick
Yes,
takeaways,
please
right?
do.
Uh, Sodium, right? Is it a good idea to reduce your sodium intake? I think that's a good starting point for some people, but no, it's not the only thing. What you take out is as important as what you add in. So you should be adding in other minerals, magnesium and potassium, and you can do that through whole foods, plenty of plants. The other piece is that if you are not already uh, cooking at home or trying to do more whole foods, that can be an easy way to cut back on your sodium intake.
Yeah,
Um, the third thing to know is that it is still individualized. If you cut back on sodium and you don't feel like you're really seeing a difference, there's other things that you're going to want to tackle with your labs. And if you're having problems like leg cramps or maybe like a wild potassium level you just can't seem to get down, you might want to take a look at how much salt you're eating, because you may be having too little.
perfect. Very good recap. Well, I think there's some great information there. If you want to know more about what Jessianna and her team do at the Kidney Nutritional Institute, kni.org, I'll put the website link below. You've got some great free tools on the website, and you've got, is it the Renew program, or are you running a ketogenic program? What's the
Yes, we run a couple programs. So you can go on there. We have guides for patients that are, talk through some of the different things you think about with your kidney disease. Those are free. They got some recipes in there, which people always love. So you can grab those on our website. If you're polycystic kidney disease, we do run a plant forward ketogenic program. Our new cohort actually starts in 2 days, January, but we run it every 4 months. So you can see that. And later this spring, we'll be launching a ketogenic program for diabetic kidney disease too.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And
Yep.
you can see the testimonials on the website. People get really very amazing results with that. And it's nice to be in a community and work with people like that as well.
It's an awesome experience. Mindset and nutrition, it's very empowering and like lots of support. So
Exactly. So I'll put the link below if you want to know about that. If you want to know more about what we do, head to www.kidneycoach.com. You'll find us on Facebook and Instagram under those handles as well. Make sure you hit subscribe and like. That way you will get notified anytime we put up more content. And if you have questions for Jessianna, or there's certain topics that you want us to cover, please put it in the comments below and we will make sure that we add it to our list of videos and podcasts to create. Jessianna, thanks again for your time, as always, your expertise and your knowledge. Always appreciate you. And for everybody listening, thanks for being part of our community. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye.